Esther, do you agree or disagree? Do you think, as I think about media, Brother Be Well is a media platform of its own. So we're going to take pride in helping to turn this train around. But Esther, I'm wondering what you would have to say about the role of media in perpetuating those messages over time.
You know, call me crazy, but I find like media is actually helping, especially right now with the pandemic and um, everything that happened in 2020. I feel like this has really given a push towards talking about mental health and trying to break through that stigma, honestly. Um, if nothing else, it's starting a lot of conversations, and then people don't feel like they're in a bubble all by themselves.
Mm.
You can find somebody who's going through what you're going through, and maybe they can point you to the right places to get help. I still feel like we are touching the surface, especially when it comes to um, what we call the major, mental illness spectrum, like things like schizophrenia or borderline personality disorder. I feel like those are still majorly unknown, and people, I think, tread more carefully and don't speak about it as much, as opposed to anxiety and depression. That's seen more on the milder category, right? So I feel like that's more socially acceptable. But even that, in prior generations, people would tell you, get over it, or pray about it. Um, it wasn't seen as a real issue, as
Mm-hmm.
opposed to the generation now actually acknowledges it, and they try to exercise good um, behaviors, right? Taking care of yourself, making sure you have help, those kind of things. So I still feel we have a long way to go, but I feel like we're coming a long way as well. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that media with time is also trying to portray a more accurate picture,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it's
Mm-hmm.
only little by little that we're going to get to that space. And also, I feel the reason why it's taking longer to overcome is the fact that mental illness is something that people try to hide, and they're able, you can function in life to some degree by hiding it. It's not until you start to, it really builds up and you start to display behaviors that makes people question
Mm-hmm.
that um, now suddenly it's a conversation, but you hide it. You go to work and you hide it.
Mm-hmm.
You're with your family and you hide it. But I think we need to get past that to where it's normal. And I feel like the generation coming up now, because it is addressed in schools due to these conversations that are happening from social media and from, the internet and TV, radio, I feel like we're going to have a different generation on our hands that's more willing and able to take care of ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think you're right. We can make short shrift of this next one because we've talked about it already. But I want to specifically mention um, um, campaigns that have
Mm-hmm.
existed more recently. Not just Brother Be Well. Know the Signs here in Northern California. I think there's a shift there. I think even 20 years ago, you didn't see billboards on the side of the road that said there were know the signs of depression, and
Yeah.
they weren't actors. I happen to know one of the people that put that campaign together. They actually recruited people who were either in recovery or had recovered from mental health conditions, and so their faces, I got depressed when my mother passed away, and this is
Mm-hmm.
what I did. I think it was a very compelling campaign and helped to kind of not erase, but certainly brush away to a good extent a lot of that internalized stigma, especially with people of color communities here in town. Would you agree?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Michael. And I just want to make a tiny little bit of correction.
Hmm.
The campaign is actually the multimedia campaign called Mental Illness. It's not always what you think. I'm actually on the creator board of that campaign. So we have billboard across Sacramento, and I think it's important, as you mentioned, to know the sign, but it's also a very positive message. I was actually recruited to be on the billboard, but this is the very essence of stigma. I self-stigmatized and I was scared,
Wow.
what if my employer see me on the billboard and they won't hire me, but they don't have to tell me that they're not hiring me because I have depressions,
Wow.
simply because they see me on the billboard. But the billboards is very beautifully done, and we've done a great job with it. It would say something along the line of brother, father, like to play music, living with depression. It's
Mm-hmm.
just making the conversation about mental illness just a bit of the normalcy, if you can call it a normalcy, as if you have, diabetes, like,
Mhm.
at work, if my friends are diabetic and I offer them a cookie and they said, no, I'm diabetic, prefer to, to stay away from the sweet because I'm diabetic. So it's not something that they're ashamed of, or if someone has hypertension, oh, I'm hypertensive, I can have too much salt. It's something that is normalized in the conversation, and it shouldn't have to come to the point where we need to normalize the conversation, because it should be so normal. It's part of the being a human being and experience those emotions and those struggles that we all experience. But because there are so much stigma and discriminations against mental illness, we need to move forward and normalize the conversation, just like Esther mentioned. So I think, thank you, Esther, for bringing that point up.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Esther. And I just want to say that, when you talk about normalizing conversations, Jacob, I hope you don't mind me mentioning this. Jacob and I have had several conversations well prior to Brother Be Well. One of the reasons I wanted him to be part of this conversation is, we have had some fairly personal conversations about our own journeys in a completely unvarnished way, if you would agree with me, Jacob. And I can't talk about just in your social settings, and you can develop friends that you can just sit back and say, wow, let me tell you, I'm sure that story about, that I just told about crazy people, me hearing that as a child, I'm sure I probably have mentioned that to Jacob before. We've had that level of conversations about things that occurred decades ago, and it's been a tremendously healing friendship. So little plug for my friendship with you, Jacob. Appreciate you being here, man. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.